enterprise programming that we've had. So welcome again. And my name is Dr. Gulnaz Golnaraki. I'm social enterprise lead with EDGE, as well as one of the mentors in residence. And I will introduce my colleague Tiana. She's going to introduce herself momentarily before we introduce Wayne formally. I would like to acknowledge that for thousands of years, this has been and still is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, Anishinaabe Nation, Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Sheridan campuses sit on these lands, and it is our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be working on this land. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much, Tiana. So our plan or roadmap for today is to have a really intimate community and conversation around our topic. So after the introductions, Wayne will be speaking to social finance and all the wonderful things that prompted you to register and be here today. We will make it interactive through some polls and an opportunity for you to ask your questions. And this is a really safe space. So we invite you to ask all the questions you have so that you have the opportunity to walk away feeling more confident and more knowledgeable about all things social finance and investment readiness. We will also have opportunities, as I said, for question and answer. We'll leave a little bit of time towards the end, but again, let's keep this as interactive. Please put your hand up, use the chat box, whatever mechanism that works for you so that we can make sure your questions are answered. And then wrap up and close as would be expected. So if we can go to the next slide. If you could please make sure that your mic is muted. The session is being recorded. We will make the recording available for those that would like to watch, rewind, watch again, and really make sure that you're reviewing the material as another round of IRP is coming up. And again, if we can go back, please, if you could share your comments in the chat box. My colleague Tiana will be keeping an eye and working very closely with Wayne in making sure your questions are answered. And Tiana, would you like to introduce yourself to the community, please?
Hi everyone, my name's Tiana. I'm an intern at EDGE and I just started. A little bit about me, I'm an HR student at Sheridan, and today I'm just here to help support Wayne and Gomez.
Thank you. Awesome. And so we can go to the next slide. For those of you that don't know EDGE, we are the entrepreneurship hub or arm of Sheridan College. EDGE is Sheridan's home for entrepreneurship, for entrepreneurs and change makers. And we focus on acting as a bridge into our community at Sheridan and out to our communities in Peel and the Halton region. And we focus on connecting entrepreneurs and change makers to the incredible creativity and innovation expertise that exists within Sheridan as well. We also work to ensure that entrepreneurship supports are available, and we know an inclusive approach to entrepreneurship has the power to positively impact the community, the economy, the society. And so those are things that are very important to us. If we can go to the next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with EDGE and what we do, again, we support aspiring entrepreneurs and change makers, social entrepreneurs. We provide training, programming, as well as mentorship when we are ready to kind of come out of our COVID state. We do have a co-working space as well, and support to access funding opportunities, which I'll give some examples of things that are coming up to keep an eye out for. We serve Sheridan students, a population that is very important to us, being an educational institution, as well as our alumni, staff, and of course, the broader community, and this being part of our very inclusive approach where we care about our community deeply. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of programming, for those that wonder what EDGE does, we provide supports and services for all stages of venture development, from explore, which is, I may have an idea, I may not have an idea, but I'm really interested in exploring what entrepreneurship and change making is all about, all the way to our SOAR level, which is We've gone to market, we're now generating revenue, and it's really time to grow, create efficiency, scale, refine, etc. So all the way through the venture startup development process. In 2019, we served, I would even say close to 4,000 participants in many, many networking, training, programming, and funding events. And if we can keep scrolling to the next, please. And also I spoke about funding opportunities. The Advantage Fund supports high potential, rise and soar. So the slide that we showed you around the different levels of supports we have at EDGE. So this is for rise and soar EDGE members that are startups or social enterprises, for-profit and nonprofit, by providing up to $10,000 in seed funding to cover the cost of eligible expenses as our ventures, Rise and SOAR members specifically, move from validated concept to market entry and beyond. For this particular fund, for those of you who are on the call who are Rise or SOAR members, applications open in mid-August, so that's very close. So please stay tuned and join us for an information session on August 18th from 2:30 till 3:30 to learn more. And my colleague Tiana will be sharing the Zoom link and password in the chat box for those of you that are SOAR and EDGE members who may be interested in applying for this funding opportunity. If we can scroll to the next, please, Tiana. The reason why we're here today. So here in the Peel and Halton regions, Investment Readiness Program mobilization has been a key priority through the Oakville Community Foundation as the lead partner of the Brant, Halton, Peel and Regional Partnership. This is a consortium of 6 community foundations, as well as Sheridan College through EDGE, through the work that we do. We're very proud of this consortium and our partnership. So again, the partnership's first allocation of funding supports 23 social purpose organizations. So that was recently announced with over 700,000. So I have the number here, $750,550 in non-replayable capital to improve their capacity to invest in innovation, participate in the social finance market, and access new investment opportunities. So these social purpose organizations that were successful in the first round include charities, not-for-profits, cooperatives, hybrid social enterprises, and mission-focused for-profits who are advanced into social, cultural, or environmental mission. Round 2 of the IRP is September 8th through October 9th. And again, Tiana will share a link to the community foundations in our chat box for more information. At EDGE, we will be hosting some programming in September on grant writing, as well as some working groups for those of you in our community who would like that added community kind of support to work through your applications. So please keep an eye out for those in terms of Eventbrite postings on our event page that will go up hopefully shortly. All right, and without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Wayne Miranda. He is the Social Finance Investment Readiness Program Lead for the McConnell Foundation, as well as the founder of Growth Mosaic Limited, which identifies early stage impact businesses, accelerates them to become investment ready, and match makes with the best investors. Growth Mosaic was recognized as a 2019 Best for the World B Corp. And Wayne has also provided business consulting in Malawi, Ghana, Benin, and Kenya, and many others. So Wayne, thank you so much for joining us today. And I will now mute myself and pass the mic over to Wayne.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction and amazing work that EDGE is doing. And it's a privilege and pleasure to be here and meet all of the entrepreneurs in the community. So thanks so much for having me. I'm going to try and share my screen now, so just give me a moment. All right, does that look good? Okay, perfect. So just to begin, I always like to start off so that we're all on the same footing, because social finance is a broad term and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so just for the purposes of this next hour, here's a functional definition of sorts. And I like to think of social finance as strictly a means to an end. I think of social finance as repayable investment. So repayable investment in the form of a loan, and that loan could be something as complicated, for example, as a social impact bond, which we'll get into later, or it could be just a term loan or a mortgage or a credit line or a credit card. Or it could be something a little bit more sophisticated, like an equity investment. So perhaps not unlike the seed fund, or maybe that's non-repayable, that Edge is leading. So there's many different forms of repayable investment, but ultimately we're talking about capital that is deployed to organizations that are having a positive social, environmental, economic, and or cultural impact at the end of the day. And that money does get repaid and recycled into the sector. So for the next hour, this is what I mean by social finance when I'm referring to it as. And just to share examples of what this looks like in practice, or sorry, I forgot. We do have a poll. So I was really curious to hear if you've got an idea or an existing plan to use social finance to enhance your organizational impact. So go ahead and respond to that poll for whichever answer or multiple choice option resonates with you. All right, are we able to share the results from the poll? If we're having it, oh, there we go, perfect. I was worried that we might have a tech glitch. Okay, so yeah, that's great. We've got a good mix in the audience. So some folks that aren't ready yet to really use social finance and are interested in ideating, and I think some of the concepts that we're going to get into today, but as well, I think Edge is very well positioned to help you in a longer term way, more than just what an hour can do. And then there's some organizations that you've got an idea, you are looking to launch your social enterprise, and you may need capital at some point in your journey. And some others are sort of ready to really scale. So this is really excellent. Thanks so much, Tiana, for queuing that up. To share some examples as to what social finance can look like and what peers in our sector may be doing with it, I like to think of 5 different use cases of social finance. And the first one being purchasing an asset. So many social purpose organizations, be it a co-op or a nonprofit or a charity or a for-profit social enterprise, in your regular operating budget, you may have insufficient funds to do something like purchase a building. And if you're trying to provide affordable housing, well, that presumably is a key facet of your strategy. And so YWCA Toronto said, well, we want to provide affordable housing that we can rent to low-income women, women perhaps facing mental health issues, and other female-led Indigenous families, all marginalized individuals. And so they raised a $1 million community bond. So this is going out into stakeholder groups that care about this outcome and want to provide mini term loans, mini loans. In this case, it happened to come from a single source, a local foundation, I believe. But nonetheless, they raised this community bond and then took that to complement the rent supplements that would make up the difference between the resident payments and the market rate for rent. And that's being the revenue stream to repay that community bond over a period of 10 years. So this is how YWCA went about purchasing a building, renovating that building, and I believe it's called the Elm Center in Toronto. So a great example of an organization using social finance to achieve impacts that would otherwise be untenable with their regular operating budget. A smaller social finance opportunity is being able to spend now to earn revenue later. So Center 3 for Print and Media Arts, based out of Hamilton, raised a $35,000 loan to hire a development officer. So they increased their fundraising capacity. And so this development officer raised money to both repay the loan. In this case, that loan came from a social finance investor named Community Forward Fund. And the development officer also generated unrestricted funds that would then go towards supporting the organization by running something called an Art Circle membership program. And so this membership program was revenue generating, and they offered ongoing workshops and classes just to the community. So a great example of being able to spend now, so incur the cost of hiring and paying a development officer in order to generate capacity in your organization to create more revenue. The kind of flip side of this is being able to spend now to prevent costs or generate savings. So the Harbourfront Centre, I'm sure many of us may have visited that here in Toronto. It's a cultural hub. They raised $95,000 actually from the Atmospheric Fund. It was recently rebranded to upgrade its lighting to LEDs, and they installed a more efficient boiler. And ultimately, this all reduced their utility bills. And so they saved money that would otherwise have gone to their, pay their bills. And so they redirect a portion of those savings towards repaying the investment from the Atmospheric Fund. So this is an example of investing to generate savings and using those savings to repay the investment. The last two examples, the spending now to earn revenue or generate savings later, these two examples in accounting terms are examples of cash flow financing. So these next two examples that I'm going to talk about are more about enterprising. So the first is going to be launching a social enterprise, and then the second is going to be scaling an existing social enterprise. So Old East Village Grocer, which is based out of London, Ontario, it's actually owned and operated by a charity called ATN Access for Persons with Disabilities. They raised a $100,000 repayable startup loan from Verge Capital. Verge Capital is an investor within the Pillar Nonprofit Network based in London, Ontario. And so Old East Village Grocer, what they do is they train and employ people with disabilities to operate a community grocer. So they're employing people facing barriers to employment. And the grocer earns revenue by selling local affordable food, and they happen to also be strategically located in an underserved neighborhood. I'm not quite sure if it's a food desert. I'm not sure if I would go that far, but it's otherwise underserved. And so this is a great example of using repayable investment to have multiple different impacts. They're providing nutritious food, they're reaching underserved markets, and they're creating employment for people facing barriers. So this is an example of using social finance to start up a social enterprise. This next example, so Anamiki Indigenous Technology, is an example of using social finance to scale an existing social enterprise. So this is a digital services agency. They offer website design and branding, custom software development, digital comms. They raised $1 million, and this was structured part as equity, part as debt. And we're going to get into what exactly that means, but $750,000 came from Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, and another $250,000 from BDC, in particular their Indigenous Entrepreneur Loan Program. And what they did with this money and investment was to further build out their team and develop their products. So they actually created an Indigenous data sovereignty product. And so they'll use these services revenues, these product revenues towards repaying this equity investment over a period of time. And Raven Indigenous Capital Partners is an investor I'll just quickly zoom in on. I think as of late, some issues of BIPOC inequality and longstanding issues have resurfaced. These are longstanding issues, but I think they have increased in the collective, awareness or mind. And Raven Indigenous Capital is trying to knock down some of those barriers as at least for Indigenous access to social finance. There's other investors, such as Equality Fund, and others that are looking to, at Marigold Capital. There's a few other funds that both McConnell Foundation and other foundations, other high net worth individuals, other organizations are supporting to really create avenues where people within those marginalized communities are leading social finance investment firms that can invest back into the community. And so I think we'll see more of this, and certainly there are gaps, but I think it's going to be an increasing space and something for us to look forward to and hold ourselves accountable to make sure it happens. So those are 5 different use cases of how social finance can be used, and some of the examples of who those investors are that are actually supporting the supply side of this equation. So now I think the question is, well, how might our organizations use social finance? And here's just a bit of a worksheet. We're not going to actually do this exercise, but you can use this slide, and I'm happy to share all of these slides if I haven't already, or no, I think I have already with Gulnaz and the Edge team. But these are prompting questions, and not all of these prompting questions may be relevant or may resonate with you, and that's totally okay. The point is just to kind of get some of the brainstorm going as to what might be beneficial for your organization. So, it's a series of what if we's or what if questions. What if we could purchase an asset? So what if we could buy the building that we're currently renting? Or what if we could own the equipment to expand our production, or purchase panels to generate power, or whatever it is? What if we could purchase assets? What would that enable our organizations to do? And how might that improve or increase our impact? What if we could spend now to earn revenue or generate savings later? So if we invested in retrofits, could that save our energy? If we hired a development officer, could that generate new revenue? If we could automate some of the recurring activities, could that increase staff bandwidth? And particularly for services-driven organizations where it's a bit of a pay per volume of services offered, automation can lead to more revenue and therefore be a repayable source of, or be a revenue source for repayable investment. And so you can use these prompts on your own time, and I'm happy to share recordings of sessions where I facilitate this in a bit more expanded way. But that might be something that you consider for those of you who are kind of just learning about social finance and wondering how this might benefit your organization or the work that you look to do. And you can, in these slides, you'll be able to just click on the download link here, just at the top. Hopefully you can see my mouse circling it. And that will, you can download those exercises offline, so you can always go through them step by step. And usually I would say it takes about 30 to 40 minutes. So it's not a huge time investment. And it's a good first cut. It's a good first pass as to how you might use social finance. And from there, you might wish to iterate and narrow in and converge on exactly what the details would be. So just before I begin, any questions so far? Or sorry, continue, any questions so far? So we've talked a bit about what social finance is, some examples of it, and some ideation exercises. Any questions so far? So we've got one person saying good so far. Thanks for that feedback.
I have one question, Wayne. So
Sure.
for those that kind of commented on, they may be new to this, they're not sure about, these options. What would you say would be the starting point? Is it to really start with the 2 slides that you recommended? Is that the first step, or what would you recommend if from here after this presentation, what further steps we can take to familiarize ourselves?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you provided the introduction to Edge as well, because I think some of these worksheets is where I begin, and I think some of the Edge supports is where it would be a next step after that. So particularly the Ideate supports that would be available in the Edge program. So this might be, again, like just a good first cut, a good first pass as to just to get the brain, flowing and some of the ideas generated. And then, there's only so much you can do without external support, and something like the Edge program might be very complementary thereafter. Okay, well, great. There's lots of time for additional questions. So if things are just ruminating in your minds, feel free to chime into chat box or just raise your hand, and Tiana will be gratefully monitoring that. So the roadmap for the rest of the session then is, let's just talk about some of the social finance opportunities. Like, what are the opportunities to really get into this marketplace and use social finance for your purposes? And given those opportunities, what does that bestow on us? Like, how do we become investment ready to really access those opportunities? And then we'll round off with some next steps. So the Social Finance Fund is the first opportunity that I'd like to talk about. So at a glance, its objective is recognizing that social finance has a role to play. It's not a be-all, end-all. It's not the magic bullet to all of our problems. It has a single role to play, and it does create social, environmental, cultural impact. And so the government has recognized this and says, okay, well, we want to increase the amount of affordable capital available to these organizations. And so it is seeding the initiative with $755 million. This is coming from ESDC, and it comes with an expectation that for every $1 of public funds, $2 of private funds will match it. And it doesn't require organizations to go off and sort of find matching dollars for every investment. It's going to happen at several layers above us. So, and I'll get into exactly how that flows in a minute in the next slide. The good news is that there's no rush for organizations to access this. It's when you are ready, it will be there. So you've got 9 to 10 years to really access this capital, and eligibility is fairly legal structure agnostic. It's for nonprofits, it's for charities, social enterprising, for-profits, co-ops, hybrid structures like B Corps, for instance. So it's fairly legal structure agnostic. And the way the funding flows, again, it's not direct from the government to your organization. It would go through the existing mechanisms within the marketplace. And I'm going to get into exactly how that works. The best thing that you can maybe look forward to is that in addition to the amount of your capital, it's going to be affordable capital. And the government has signaled they're willing to take highly concessionary terms on their capital. So it could be 0% interest, for instance, on loans from them to the intermediaries, or it could be even sub-zero. So either way, it's going to lead to below market rate sources of capital, which is always helpful. So how this money flows in a visual format is that you've got ESDC, so Employment and Social Development Canada, which is a ministry within the federal government, investing alongside private investors. Could be foundations, like for instance, McConnell Foundation, accredited investors like other foundations, high net worth individuals, could be retail investors. So you and I just investing through a community bond mechanism, for instance. So investing alongside through a couple layers, and ultimately that money lands to social finance investors. So I've mentioned a few in the examples. So they could be, for instance, Community Forward Fund, Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, perhaps Equality Fund, Catalyst Fund. There's so many different funds there. I will provide a directory of about 70 or so different investors, and you will be able to shortlist by the domain area in which you operate, the geography, the amount, the type of capital, so that you know which investors are appropriate for you. And then your organizations would apply to those investors for ultimately the money that's coming from these public and private sources. So that's how the money flows. So there's no social finance fund, there's no website for it that you would apply to or anything like that. It's a sort of systems innovation. So they're trying to flow money through the existing structure of the marketplace. So if I blow this out a little bit, so you've got the green side. So this is where investment and repayment is happening sort of behind the scenes between the government and the private investors with those social finance investors. And you will be able to click on that directory so that you can bring up the list of investors. We don't quite exactly know which investors are going to access this money, but it's most likely coming from that directory. And then you've got your organizations on the right-hand side or in that yellow box where you are looking to generate greater and enhanced social and environmental, cultural, economic impact. And so you're looking to access those investments, and you will be repaying those social finance investors as well. And the key thing that I'm sort of circling here is that it's really investment-ready social purpose organizations that are going to access that type of investment opportunity. And so that's what we're going to spend the rest of this time on. So typically, if we start from right to left, typically a social purpose organization seeking investment and faces just multiple different hard brick walls. And some of those brick walls might be, well, not quite ready yet in terms of a business plan that's investor ready, or haven't quite been able to access the very expensive legal advice, or don't quite have an investor ready financial model, or haven't been able to run highly professional feasibility studies or market analysis that would convince an investor of the market opportunity. And so there's lots of walls there. And what the IRP is seeking to do is sort of knock down some of those barriers. So for organizations that are working to become investment ready, perhaps do some market analysis, run a feasibility study, refine their business plan, make a financial model that is investor ready, access the legal advice, develop out the product and service. There's many things there. That's why I've added a couple different, multiple dots. So the IRP is seeking to help you cover some of the cost of knocking down those barriers, so that you can then get back on track and become that investment ready social purpose organization to access the social finance investor. So that's what the purpose of the Investment Readiness Program is. And the IRP is sitting alongside the Social Finance Fund, but they are quite separate initiatives. So I can't stress enough that the Social Finance Fund right now does not exist. It's still in legal design. There's certainly consideration by the federal government, given the COVID-19 response opportunity, to accelerate the timeline on that. But it does not exist, and it will be repayable investment. So repayable investment in the form of loans, equity, revenue share agreements, and so forth. Whereas, conversely, the Investment Readiness Program is non-repayable capital. So this is what Gulnaz was referring to earlier about September 8th to October 9th is your next nearest opportunity to access the investment readiness grants effectively. So let's get into what the Investment Readiness Program is all about. And it is really trying to help your organization wherever you're at. So it's trying to meet you there. And there's a few different areas, and everyone has slightly different language. So don't feel like you have to fit yourself in a single box here. It really is a broad spectrum, and lots of different ways to sort of slice and dice what that spectrum can be articulated as. And here's just one of them. So some groups are on the right-hand side. You're ready to access capital. You have the execution capacity. You have an investment-ready project. And perhaps what you really need is just some investor relations support, maybe some legal negotiation help to sign on the dotted line and sort of really, go through the T&Cs. Some organizations are not quite there yet, but you're close. So you're really needing to develop the investment case, but you're starting from a very clear project idea. And you either need to develop the organizational capacity to execute that idea or just meet the investor requirements. And so this could be very much like the business planning, the financial modeling, the legal advice, the market studies, etc. So lots of work in terms of developing the investment case. And for the earlier stage, to be honest, while the IRP does exist for you, there is a lot of free support that you might want to access first, because it just takes a little bit less effort. You don't have to fill out a long grant application. So if you're looking to clarify your idea, there's lots of ideation support. You might have a sort of a concept, but you need to clarify the high level details, really kind of pressure test your assumptions, assess what investment readiness needs you might have. And for groups that are even earlier than that, you're just exploring social finance, and that's okay. And you're not quite sure if it's right for you. You're not quite there in terms of having a project concept yet, but you're learning and you're generating ideas. And this is a session that you can attend. And again, it's all for free. And there's others as well. So if you're in those explore and clarify type stages, you may wish to look for those free supports, because it's, let's say, honestly save you time. And if you're at that development and access stage, the IRP may help you cover off some of the non-trivial expenses of becoming investment ready. So just to get a sense again of who's in the room, where might you be on the spectrum? And again, there's no right answer. It's just the answer that might resonate most with you. So yeah, go ahead and answer that poll. And thank you, Tiana, for queuing it up so smoothly.
There are a few questions. Would you want to answer them now or?
Sure, let's do that. Yeah, thanks for flagging that.
No problem. So the first one is from Charlene. I would like to know how I can access and use funds like these to hire personnel to grow my business.
Okay, great. So yes, certainly, building out a team, and we're going to get into this as well. Building out the team is a critical component of becoming investment ready, and as well as just growing the impact that you're having. And so, it really depends. Like every project, every investment ask can differ. As you've noticed in some of the examples, the Print Center for Media and Arts, basically all their investment ask was hiring personnel, and whereas others it might be a component thereof. And so I think it's really about like understanding what all your investment needs are, which investors are appropriate for those needs, and just being matched to those. So I'm not sure if that directly answers your question, but hopefully it gets you started.
And then another question, can these funds be used for marketing/sales in a startup social enterprise?
Okay, yeah, great. Good question, Lisa. And maybe just to clarify, or maybe I'll answer it in both ways. So it depends what you mean by these funds. So the social finance fund itself, so the capital that would come through the government, absolutely. If you're approaching a community forward fund or an equality fund or a Marigold Capital or whoever, marketing and sales, very well understood as a needed potential investment opportunity in your startup social enterprise. If you're looking for marketing and sales support through the Investment Readiness Program, that's where I would say the IRP is not for programmatic expenses. It's not for regular operating expenses. It has a very niche role to play in helping you become investment ready and helping you access external services like the business planning consultancy or like the legal advice, etc., so that you can strengthen your investment case. So I completely understand if the argument would be, well, marketing and sales is going to generate more traction, which would improve our investment case. That is valid, and I completely understand where you're coming from. It's just that the IRP is not designed for that. It's rather designed to, again, knock down some of those walls that aren't regular operating or aren't regular programmatic type expenses.
And can I pipe in quickly here?
Yeah.
Would you mind very quickly, again, I noticed a few others have joined, just very quickly distinguish between what you talked about around social finance funds and the directory that will be included in your PowerPoint that we'll send out versus the IRP, just so we can just review that very quickly one more time.
For sure, and I'm happy to reiterate multiple times as well, because it is complicated and there's a lot of terminology there. So the Social Finance Fund is an initiative of the government, does not exist, so the money's not flowing yet, but they are looking at accelerating that timeline. And it is about repayable investment and increasing the available funds as well as the affordability of those funds in the marketplace. It will flow through social finance investors. Conversely, the Investment Readiness Program has been flowing, it's operating. Its purpose is to help organizations get ready to access the Social Finance Fund and other social finance opportunities. So it is rather about non-repayable investment or non-repayable funds to help you become investment ready. So there isn't necessarily a comprehensive list on what you can spend it on, but it's meant to access external services that would otherwise be have a cost barrier, and it looks like business planning or financial modeling or legal advice, etc. So that's not a comprehensive list again, though.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to everyone, the next round of the Investment Readiness Program, the next round for applications is September 8th until October 9th. Please keep an eye out. And if you scroll up in the chats, Tiana has provided a link to the community foundations for more information. And also keep an eye out, EDGE will be running grant writing workshops as well as working groups in September to support you in that application process for the Investment Readiness Program specifically.
Amazing. That will be very helpful. I do see a question from Chris about, can the funds be used to hire people within Canada or outside of Canada? Excellent question. So I think the IRP funds, I'm actually not sure, to be honest. I don't have a good answer for that. My understanding was that it might need to be in Canada, but you may need to check with your local community foundation. So I wonder if Gulnaz, if you might be able to take that question.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Do the funds have to be used within Canada, or can it be used to hire people outside of Canada?
That's a great question, Chris, and I don't want to mislead you. So I will make a note to find out and I will let you know.
Yeah. And possibly it might vary. So best to communicate with your local IRP partner, and that would be Gulnaz and the team.
Absolutely, Chris. We'll make sure we get you the answer. So we will be in touch by email. By Ravi, very quickly, Tiana has shared the link to the Advantage Fund. That is a different fund. That particular fund, there's a Zoom link and an Edge password for the Advantage Fund. That is a fund that will launch this month through Edge, and it's specifically for Rise and SOAR members. Okay, so I don't want to confuse that with what Wayne is talking about. So for those of you on the call who are Rise and SOAR members at Edge specifically, we have the Advantage Fund that is coming up, and the Zoom link and the Edge password is for an information session that's coming up, and I'll give you the date right now. So it's the information session is on August 18th from 2:30 till 3:30 for the Advantage Fund through Edge for Rise and SOAR members. The second link, Investment Readiness Program, Community Foundations, that's what you would be looking at for the investment readiness that, that Wayne is speaking to.
Amazing. Okay, so just another view on the Investment Readiness Program and how to engage. So I like to think of and recommend a three-step process. So the first step is really try to understand kind of where you are in this spectrum and what exactly do you need that IRP to help you cover the cost of. So is it capital advisory, so like fundraising support? Is it the legal side? Is it impact measurement? Is it business planning or market study or product and service improvement? So clarify what exactly is needed and make sure that that is an eligible expense. The second step then would be contact some of the service providers, and there's literally dozens and hundreds. So there's some that are official named service providers through the government program, but by no means are you required to only stick with those named ones. You can go to any coach, consultant, organization, services firm that you feel is competent, capable, and trustworthy to do the work that you need. And then the last step is exactly what Gulnaz was mentioning, which would be the September 8 opportunity. In this case, it's through community foundations. And so it would be to apply to those quote unquote sort of readiness support partners, as it's called in the program. So there's kind of like your three-step process: know what you need, contact who would actually meet your needs, and then apply. And just to round this off so that you've got sort of all the information, the Investment Readiness Program's objective is really to strengthen your organization to ultimately participate in the social finance marketplace. There's actually no requirement. Like if you go through the Investment Readiness Program, you are not required to then go off and access a loan or anything of that nature. It's helping you position for that, but it's not forcing you to. The total available is it's a $50 million pilot program. It's non-repayable. We're hoping that the government would extend it and even expand it, but the pilot is ending March of 2021. Eligibility, again, is quite legal structure agnostic. So it's nonprofits, charities, social enterprise, for-profits, co-ops, hybrid structures like B Corps, etc. What would be ineligible would be sort of unregistered organizations or sole proprietorships. So you do have to be incorporated. And the use of proceeds, this is a critical one. So what would be permitted is one-time or time-bound expenses to help your organization become investment ready. So what's ineligible would be just your regular operating expenses like payroll or rent or marketing, or to actually use the IRP on what would rather be an investment, which both of which I've heard lots of feedback from community foundations on some of the #1 reasons why they've declined organizations requesting for funds in the first round. So I would just hate to see you go through the whole process and request something that's ineligible. And again, the way the funding flows is through a few organizations, but these are the actual upcoming call for proposals. The best one I'd say right now that's open and that there's clarity around is the Community Foundations of Canada September 8 to October 9th call. And this is for requests between $10,000 and $100,000. But do check in, I think, with your local community foundation if they have further guidance for you on what would be appropriate to ask for. And there are, just quickly note, there are separate application forms depending on whether you are a charity, so therefore a qualified donee, or a nonprofit, a social enterprise, for-profit, or a co-op, or otherwise a non-qualified donee. So there's just 2 different application forms, 2 different doors, still leads to the same program though. And so you'll eventually be able to click through on the slides to get to that application guidance. All right, so just some tips. I know that was some of the questions that I received through Gomez and Tiana. I can't stress enough that the program is not a regular granting program. It's not meant for operating costs or programmatic expenses. And I put the asterisk there just because in this next call, just given the COVID realities of organizations needing a bit of operating buffer, frankly, they have said up to 20% of your request can be used for these expenses. So just note that the program is not designed for this, but this was a COVID-19 response amendment, if you will. So if you're approaching the program for this core funding, I hesitate to recommend it for you because you may not be successful, and it isn't a light amount of work to apply. So just note that. And the process will be competitive. So what we have demonstrated in the program is that there's significant demand for social finance. So you do want to try and put your best foot forward, and just note that it will be competitive. And the other facet is, every community foundation has varying degrees of capacity to provide feedback. And so, I'm always happy to have a debrief call, but lots of organizations may not be in a position to do so. And then some tips to set you up for success. So I've got 3 different tips here. Be clear about your intention to seek repayable investment at some point in future. Again, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, it doesn't have to be next year, it doesn't have to be in the next 5 years, but you can point to at some point in your future, in your journey of scaling up your enterprise or scaling up your mission, how you might use repayable investment in that journey and what revenue source is going to contribute to your investment repayments. So try to be very clear about that. The second tip of setting you up for success, be clear about the impact that you're going to have. So ensure that it's meaningful impact, that it's significant impact. You will be asked to explain how you are contributing to things like the Sustainable Development Goals. And the last tip is be very clear about why you need non-repayable funds to sort of knock down some of those walls that I was referring to earlier. So how does the non-repayable funds answer key questions or address key challenges that are hindering your ability to access the social finance that you were clear about in point 3? So not to say that following those 3 tips is going to guarantee you the IRP funds, but it does set you up for greater success and greater chance of being successful.
Wayne, can I ask some clarifying questions here for members?
Yeah.
So at a very basic level, when you say for #1, not for operating costs nor programmatic expenses, could you just give a couple of examples of what those may be so that people can put it into context for their ventures or organizations?
For sure. Yeah, thanks for that question. So operating costs such as rent or payroll or any administrative costs, things like that. So I completely recognize that these are real costs, and in order to do good work, we have to pay people. It's just that the IRP program isn't for that. There may be actually, even in the local community foundation, there may be other granting streams that could cover those types of expenses. So yeah, just wanted to note things like that are ineligible.
Sorry, go ahead, Bhairavi, go ahead.
Sorry, can I clarify though, Wayne, what you mentioned earlier about the COVID-related 20% part of the cost, that technically can be towards payroll, et cetera, if I understood that right?
That is correct, yeah. So up to 20% of your ask. So let's say you're asking for $10,000, 2,000 of that can be used for your core funding to do the work that you're doing. I think it still likely has to be in service of your project. So it can't be for a whole separate program. It can't be just for anything is what I'm saying. But it can be for line items like payroll, line items like budget, or sorry, rent and things like that.
So up to 20% of what the total amount you're requesting.
That's correct, yeah.
Great, thank you. One other question. So we've had various workshops and conversations and sessions here over the last almost a year around measuring, like, what is impact, measuring impact, and we've had a few sessions on the UN Sustainable Development Goals specifically. So having debriefed with applicants and whatnot, do you have any tips to share, maybe examples of how you would suggest our members really think about how they articulate the impact and make the connection to UN SDGs? Any tips or suggestions would be awesome.
Yeah, we are going to get a bit into that, but let me just answer the question now, and I'll skip it later. One of the key ingredients to become investment ready is articulating a clear impact model. And some of the systems, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these are the 17 goals of all the United Nations have subscribed to. I think of it, and this isn't my word, so I can't take credit for it, but it's the world's to-do list. And so if you can use systems like that, these are metrics and measurement systems that investors understand, that they're relatively comfortable with, that they can get behind. And it's kind of speaking everyone's on the same language, if you will. It's not the only system though. So it is probably increasingly the trend, but there are other systems. So quickly, there's the IRIS system, so IRIS, which is codified metrics. So for instance, if you're talking about employment generation, it could be taking a gender lens or a barriers lens or a quality lens, so things like leadership development and training and so forth. And for each of these metrics, they have a code. I'm just going to make something up like A1.1 or something like that. And so again, it speaks the language that investors can understand. And what it also enables investors to do is aggregate the impact from organization A in their portfolio with organization B in their portfolio. So it's relatively easy for us at our organization to kind of pick and choose these metrics and make sense of it internally. It's relatively difficult for those investors to aggregate that up. So if I'm investing in a solar panel organization and an affordable housing organization, both are having great impact, but making sense of it from a portfolio level is easier if I can say, well, both of these are hitting on these two different sustainable development goals, or both of these are hitting on these two different IRIS metrics, for example. So that would be my tip. Try to use those established systems.
So two other questions. Any tips on where they can find more info about IRIS? Google?
Yeah,
that's
Google,
always a safe bet.
I think one of the best sources, I don't know if they have it still up on their website publicly, but Acumen Fund is, I can't recall, I think it's like Acumen Academy or something of that nature, but they have content on the IRIS system. You may also look at the global, so GIN, it's Global Impact Investor Network. GIIN for short. And so if you Google either of those, Acumen Fund or the GIN, so Global Impact Investors Network, you may stumble into what IRIS is.
I have one last question. Do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
All
Yep.
right, so for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, certainly at EDGE, we have been working hard to align ourselves as an accelerator with those, and we're in that journey right now. And we've had a few sessions for our members around that. And I suppose the feedback has been that the indicators that they have are a great starting point to go off of, but they also seem to have a very strong international development flavor to them. And so how do you suggest aligning those with very localized ventures, right? Any quick tips on how to think about aligning to the SDGs in a way that makes sense for very local community kind of based projects or ventures?
Yeah, I would say more than just aligning to the SDG, there's something called the Common Approach to Impact Measurement. And what this is doing, and this kind of reconciles this question of, well, you know, a lot of those SDG metrics end up being quite macro level. And for an organization that is sort of, let's say, creating employment in a rural, remote or community or something of that nature, may not, you know, some of those metrics may not resonate. And so the Common Approach to Impact Measurement is a set of 5 principles that are not prescriptive of what to measure. It's more instructive on how to go about measuring. So it's not about like which system or what metrics or what impact is right for you. It's rather about adopting 5 principles, and let me see if I can remember them. Actually, no, I'm not going to remember them, but I can send a link on the Common Approach to Impact Measurement. There's actually really good content there. But it's things like plan your change, you know, pick metrics that matter for you, gauge interest, gauge your progress on a regular basis, report on that transparently. So it's like that level. And if you can follow those, not only are investors going to believe the impact in which you are saying you are having, but it also, again, speaks their language, and it's an increasing trend that more organizations are going to fall in line, if you will, with that common approach to impact measurement. Excellent questions. Thanks so much for participants and for Glonas for relaying those. Okay, well, I'll take maybe 10 or so minutes to talk about now becoming investment ready. So I guess the bad news is there really is no shared definition nor a recipe, if you will, to, you know, check all the boxes and automatically you become investment ready. So that's kind of the bad news. Now, the good news is we can point to some common ingredients, which if you can point to in your organization or in your project, investors will, you know, gain the confidence that this is going to go well and could invest. So what are those ingredients? The first is the team. So sorry, I went too far ahead. The team, so we're thinking about what skills you have, what backgrounds you bring, what experiences you have to bear to the project, as well as how well you've worked together. So if it's a startup, potentially you've collaborated in other organizations or in other ways prior to this startup. So if you can speak to that and how you have communicated and how you've project managed and how you've achieved results together, as well as, in addition to like who's executing the project, who's sort of surrounding and playing supports in your project. What's the advisory team perhaps looking like? What's the governance structure looking like? And who's on the board perhaps? And what networks do they bring? What expertise do they have? What roles might they play in support of your venture success? So team is quite broad, and it runs from like who's the paid employees through to volunteers, through to just mentors and advisors. So if you can really speak to everyone who's helping you bring together success and smoothly execute your project, investors really start there. In the earlier stage your organization, the more that the team matters. So that's the first ingredient. So if you've read this book, Good to Great, then once you've got the right people on the bus, then where are you taking them? So what's your strategy and plan? And strategy is, kind of the basics, like what's the vision and the mission? What are the goals? What are the milestones along the way? How are you going about it? As well as what are you not going to do? And the plan is really about, well, great, here's kind of our plan A, but what are all the risks associated with our strategy and the execution thereof, and how do we mitigate those risks? So the plan is good to have, as well as to have plan B and C and D and E if, the inevitable, curveballs get thrown at you and things don't quite go as planned initially. So I think investors want to see organizations have the ability to think about the risks that are present and be able to strategize around those, think about scenarios and plan for multiple different futures. And again, to scope this for you, don't feel that you need a full corporate playbook for every scenario under the sun. It's rather just like, what are the key risks present in your venture, and how do you plan to mitigate against any unfavorable circumstances? So great, you've got the right people on the bus, so you know where you're heading. So what? What does that all achieve at the end of the day? And what is the articulated impact that you're going to have? And we've talked a little bit about that, so I might skip that now. And once you've had the impact, how do you self-sustain? And what are the finances? Investors are money people and numbers people. So they'll want to understand your past. They'll look at your financial statements, for instance. Those would be your balance sheet, your income statement, and your cash flow statement. And ideally, those are audited. But most investors understand not every organization is at the capacity of being able to afford an external auditor. And so ideally, it's prepared at least by a chartered accountant or a CMA or some certified accountant, so that there's some general accounting practices applied, as well as some credibility to the numbers. So they'll understand your past. They might think about looking at your past borrowing history. If you've taken out money and repaid that money, that's really good track record to demonstrate that you can manage money effectively. They'll look at your present pledges or your contracts or your donations or your, the revenue streams that are coming in multiple different forms. So effectively your accounts receivable rather. And they'll also look at your present case, so where you're at today, as well as your future, and what are those potential futures. So typically they'll look at 3 different scenarios that you'll want to present to them. What's kind of this base case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? If everything doesn't quite go in our favor, how do the numbers look? As well as what's an aggressive or best case scenario? So if everything could go in our favor and beyond, what's the most impact, and what are the financial results from that? And then the last ingredient is your investor approach and the due diligence package that you prepare. So I often find organizations, it's kind of heartbreakingly, speaking to the wrong investor, and they're not really set up for success, and the odds aren't in their favor right from the get-go because the wrong investors in the room. So I've seen things like a solar business talking to a food investor or vice versa. And so you want to avoid that. You want to do your homework. And again, there's going to be directories that I can share with you so that you can shortlist based on type of capital that you're looking for, the type of sector that you're in, the geography, etc. So once you've got the right investor in the room, then it's all about what's the conversation and being prepared for that. And that's where your due diligence package comes in, sometimes referred to as the deal room. And I think I've got a slide. Yeah. So this is the slide on what a deal room may look like. And again, you don't want to treat this, you don't want to treat either the last slide or this slide as a checklist. It's rather just a starting point, and you probably want to use it as a conversation starter. So when you're at the stage of an investor saying to you, okay, well, send us your deal room or send us your, all of these different documents, what they're saying is, okay, we're going to start due diligence. So we're going to need some of this documentation. At that stage is when you want to clarify, well, what should be in our deal room? And most likely it's going to be some, probably not all, and some things may be missing from this list, but it's going to be 80% of this list or so. So it's going to be the strategy and the business plan, perhaps an annual report or an annual brochure that you're putting out. Resumes, again, they're going to want to understand your team. So resumes of the board, of the management, key staff, even if they're volunteers. Anyone who is core to the success of your project. Corporation documents, registration documents, any compliance documents that you need. Letters of support from stakeholders go a really long way to demonstrate both the demand for what you're doing in terms of testimonials of the success that you're having. I'm gonna skip the financial information because I've already talked a bit about that. If you're specifically looking to purchase an asset, so asset financing, then it's going to be about a description of the asset, quotes and budgets for what it's going to cost to purchase, to construct, to renovate, to maintain in an ongoing way, insurance for all of that. So they'll want copies of any agreements or contracts with engineers or architects or whoever it is that's working to develop that asset with you. And then lastly, they will ask you about the impact information as well. So the impact metrics, as well as the qualitative stories. They may ask something about something called a theory of change or a logic model. I'm not sure if you've gone into that. Okay, seems like you have. Thanks for that.
I just add one thing, Wayne. So we are working, we did have a series of workshops on impact measurement where they did talk about logic models and theory of change. Those workshops, for those who are on this session, will repeat again in October. So please keep an eye out on our impact measurement webinar series. There will be 2 of them, part 1, part 2, on exactly what Wayne is talking about.
Fantastic. Yeah, amazing that is so timely. So I highly recommend taking advantage of that. Investors really can engage with a theory of change because it lays out exactly what your organization is about. And again, just increasingly so, they'll want to understand your contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals in particular. Okay, so again, try not to treat either of those 2 slides, the last slide or this slide, as a checklist, but as a starting point. And I like to always offer what you should look for in an investor. Understandably so, there is that power dynamic because you're an organization that is in need of money and you're speaking to an investor who has that money. And so there really is this power dynamic of the haves and the have-nots. But to kind of somewhat level the playing field, not totally, of course, but have in the back pocket what you want from an investor. And I think what I would recommend is not just look for the money, but look for a real partner in success for your mission. And it's right and understandable if you're, you were kind of focused on the terms and the reporting requirements and, the conditions that investors might have. And these are critically important, but also consider 3 other things. And that would be who else is in the portfolio that this investor has invested in? Could there ever be synergies in the work that you're collectively doing? Maybe that leads to mergers, maybe that leads to joint ventures, maybe that just leads to learning exchange. So consider who else is being invested in, one, to make sure that it's the right investor for you, but also there could be some really impactful collective action happening. And the value add that the investor brings. So oftentimes there could be a sidecar technical assistance facility, meaning that for investees of their fund, they can offer ongoing services, and that would be either cost shared or free. And so what other services or benefits do they offer? Do they even play hands-on roles if something like a COVID-19 happens? So when I've spoken to some of the funds that McConnell Foundation, or not spoken directly, but we've heard from them, and they are hands-on supporting those organizations to be successful in adapting and surviving and thriving through COVID-19. And so, that's an additional value add. It's not, it's not being paid for. You didn't sign on the terms and conditions that they would do that, but it's in both organizations' interest for that to happen. And lastly, think about their network. Perhaps you've seen them speak on a recent panel, or where that they are serving on a particular working group and you're trying to get the ear of others in that working group. So who could they introduce you to? If you're trying to create systemic change at levels above all of us, maybe that warm introduction could spark that type of change. So think about those 3 different things as well, in addition to the money and the terms. All right, so I think we're more or less at time, but I will, I'll just round it off with, once you feel you've got your idea and you've kind of gone through some of those investment readiness considerations, here's just a bit of an assessment. And again, we won't have time to do this together, but this slide is going to be available to you, and you may want to refer back to it. And it can, again, inform you on how you may want to use the Investment Readiness Program. So if you feel like you're putting some X's or some question marks here as you assess your project or your organization, those X's and those question marks are excellent uses of the Investment Readiness Program. And so that's why the IRP exists, to help you transform those question marks into answers and those X's into check marks. Okay, so I think I might hand it back to Gomez.
There is one last question.
Oh yeah, please, sorry, I forgot about questions. Oh yeah, let's do that.
So Sean said, in your opinion and in what you're seeing in the investment readiness space, does social finance have preferred sectors, or put another way, are they up to upcoming sectors getting a great deal for attention?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, there certainly are patterns. I don't have off the top of my head what those patterns are. I can point to investors that are operating all over the place, but certainly there are gaps. So, I think there's lots in social purpose real estate. So affordable housing, even though there's a great need for more. Other co-working space investments, yeah, arts and culture spaces, etc. So there's lots of work there. There's lots of work in sort of employment social enterprises. There is investment in sort of tech-enabled or tech-based social enterprises. And this is just off the cuff, so I'm probably missing stuff, but that's maybe where the top three that are coming to mind right now.
And I have one more question. So we do have a little bit of time before we wrap the chat, or you can certainly use your microphones as well. So we have one. Do you have a proposal you might have put through an IRP applications that we can use as a reference while working on our application? I think there's some sensitivities there, probably some privacy and confidentiality concerns. So Sonia, I don't think applications can be shared. But Wayne, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I echo that. Even if I did have a successful application, I wouldn't be able to share. But I also think perhaps the grant writing session that you're referring to might be the best opportunity for exactly that support.
Perfect. So Sonia, what we have coming up are fairly extensive programming in September. We have the two-part workshop that I think you came to in July. They're running again, but in between each of them, we're going to have working groups. So the first will focus on telling a powerful story in your application. The second one will focus on budget and work plans, so that you can actually work on them with a group of peers and with Bethany specifically, and another individual that we're confirming who will release the information on. And then at the end of the month, for our social enterprise monthly meetup, my plan is to invite 3 applicants that were successful in round 1 for a panel discuss strong. So hopefully, they'll be able to share some of the tips that you're looking for. So we have one from Ravi. Excuse me, a general question. IRP, is the format of the application this time around similar to what was part of the spring application? Can we use the same sections as a guide to prep for this one? I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Wayne?
Yeah, it's very similar, and there may be just some slight differences, but the good news is all of those application forms for this upcoming round are public. So what I'll do is, as soon as I drop my screen share, I'll get that link and I'll put it in the chat box for everyone.
Wonderful. Awesome. Many startups don't have financials. So with regards to projections for the next 5 years, what do you suggest specifically for a SaaS? All the numbers will be hypothetical.
Yeah, excellent question. And investors will certainly understand where you're coming from. I think investors will get that startups are, projections or guesses or hypotheses. For the Investment Readiness Program, they do say up to 5-year financials, so historical. For a startup, presumably there's either limited or no historical financials. And so it really is up to. So if it doesn't exist, that's okay. It shouldn't directly affect your application. There's no quotas for only organizations with a certain financial history or something like that. I believe the purpose of asking that question is just to understand your organization's capacity to manage the ask that you are requesting. So if you can explain or demonstrate that ability in other ways aside from historicals, that would be in your favor.
Great, wonderful. Any other questions for Wayne before we wrap up? This has been so incredibly informative. And Wayne, I have to say you have such a wonderful way of explaining really complex concepts in a way that's digestible. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
And I'm just showing this slide, but it's going to be clickable once you get the slides. And so these are potentially where your support providers might come and the investor directory that I've been referring to. So all of those directories are public and available.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to ask, so Wayne, you were going to type in a link for us, which we thank you. And I'm going to ask Tiana to also share our evaluation form link. We are honing our offering based on what members tell us. And again, we value your input. So Tiana will be sharing a link that will literally take 5 minutes, if that, for you to complete around how you found the session today, and also provide any feedback on things you'd like to see going forward. And we really would appreciate if you could please click on that link right now and take a few minutes to fill it out for us. So that concludes our session for today. On behalf of the EDGE team, I'd like to thank Wayne for taking time to be with us. And again, thank you for such an informative presentation and the care and time with which you answered the questions so thoughtfully. I also want to thank our members and the community for continuously showing up for these sessions. And it's lovely to see some of the same faces coming on board and new ones as well. And we certainly appreciate all your support for our community and for being a part of it. An announcement, again, I just want to highlight, we have another webinar coming up next week on August 19th. If you haven't seen that one on our website, called Balancing the 3Ms of Your Social Venture, I believe is the name. That one is being hosted and facilitated by Steve Boone, who is a highly experienced senior executive within the not-for-profit space. In fact, he was executive director of the Y for many years and has been very much an advocate of our community here as a mentor, volunteer mentor as well. So please consider that session next week. For members, again, a reminder that if you are at the SOAR or RISE levels of membership, keep an eye out for the Advantage Fund information session that's coming up. Again, for those that are at those two levels, those sessions of the information session for the Advantage Fund, one more time, is August 18th from 2:30 till 3:30. And Tiana had posted the Eventbrite link for that for you if you scroll up in the chats. And keep an eye out for the IRP coming up in September, and certainly our webinars to support the grant writing process. And with that, without further ado, again, thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everyone. Tiana and I will stay behind until everyone logs off, or should anyone have any questions. And we're going to stop the recording now. And thank you so much for taking time. Please have a wonderful day. You're very welcome, Sean and Bhairavi and everyone else who joined. Thank you for your time. Oh, and I see there's a poll that just popped up. So if you do have time and would like to fill that out, please do before you head off.